Welcome to Nighttime Logic. Nighttime Logic is the part or parts of a story that are felt but not necessarily consciously processed. It's also the name of our series. Today is Thursday, September 25th, 2025. It's technically autumn here where I'm broadcasting from in New York, but it still feels like summer, and it's a fine day to wrap up this summer series, this summer of Liminal Space. Before I introduce our wonderful guests, I always forget to introduce myself. I'm your host. I'm not Mr. Rourke. I'm Dan Braum. My newest book is called Creatures of Liminal Space, and I just got in the mail. I don't have ARCs yet. My next book, as this little postcard tells me, is called Phantom Constellations. It's strange tales and ghost stories coming from Cemetery Dance. I'm here with two fantastic artists and writers. I'm here with Joe Kaplan and Luisa. How are you two doing?
Good. Excited to be here.
I'm so sick of hearing myself talk that I would love it. Normally I introduce all my guests, but I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a little bit about your work before we dive into it. We'll start with Joe.
Thanks. I'm Joe Kaplan. I've written a number of short stories that have appeared all over the place and a couple of novels. It Will Just Be Us, my haunted house novel, When the Night Bells Ring, which is my horror western, and my upcoming book, which is going to be out this coming March. It's called The Midnight Muse. So I'm excited about that. And yeah.
Great to have you back on the program, Joe. And welcome to the program, Luisa. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Okay, great. I'm Luisa Cologne-Thayer. I'm the author most recently of the book The Burning Class, which is also put out by Cemetery Dance Publications. Before that, my first novel was Bad Moon Rising. I've been a writer, journalist, and artist for quite a long time now. And these two books have come out in the last few years. I'm working on a third one. And I'm also a huge horror movie fan, as Daniel well knows.
Wow, is the third book in the series of the two that you've written, or is it something totally new?
It's connected. I feel like they're all connected, by common threads. So it's connected. Not that anyone's ever picked up on that. No one's ever been like, "Ooh, I like how those books were connected." But
I like the Luisa-verse.
Yeah, exactly.
You could leave people to see who picks up those connections, or you're just daring me. You're just daring me to ask and search for them now. So it's exciting to hear that. And Midnight Muse looks great. It's a great cover, and it's so great that you've got ARCs for it already, Joe. So that's super exciting. Looking forward to it, and we're going to talk about that as well. So I had some questions ready, but the topic that I speak to both Joe and Luisa about is music. So I just want to skip right to it. Liminality and music. It was something that didn't really occur to me until our sound check, and I was thinking about it. So I have some thoughts about it, but we'll start with Joe. What are your thoughts? You can talk about liminality in general, and we'll get to that as well. But some musings off the cuff, or what are your thoughts on liminality in music?
That's really interesting because I feel like I hadn't consciously thought about these two ideas together, and yet they both appear extensively in my book, The Midnight Muse. So liminality, I guess, in general, in case anybody is listening that isn't super familiar with the idea.
Well, that's me. I hate to cut you, but yeah, when I'm asking this question, it's not to be random about it, but it's yeah, help me with that too.
It's just the teacher in me that's first let's establish the terminology.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's talk about it.
I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways of looking at it, but I always think of it as those between places, and this could be the between places literally in a building, hallways and staircases, and the spaces that are just meant to be thresholds or avenues from one space to another.
And those seem to be the way that pop culture, I had no idea when I titled the book how prevalent and even popular the zeitgeist was in pop culture in that first part of your definition. In fact, I was very shocked when people would. I thought for sure when I write a book, it's like, hey, another niche thing I'll have to just like. And people are like, oh, liminality. I'm like, what?
I think it's because the backrooms became so popular, and the backrooms are that whole creepypasta of clipping into this creepy space that is creepy because it's just a series of hallways and like empty office space with like yellow walls, and that's the creepy aspect of it. And I think people took off with the backrooms and invented all these like crazy levels and places with monsters, and it's almost like that becomes less interesting than the simplicity, which is I think what makes liminality so unsettling. It's the simplicity of it, that you're not one place or another. So I think there's the physical aspect, and there's also the more abstract aspect of being between reality and not, between reality and dreams. Daniel, I feel like your work really, I'm not surprised that you have liminality coming directly into your work, because I think your collection, Underworld Dreams, is just all full of that kind of vibe, that feeling. So
and back to your work, I'm not surprised that you have such a clear definition of something so inherently unclear.
It is very unclear, but in my book, The Midnight Muse, it follows a metal band whose lead singer disappears in the forest in Oregon, and a year later they go to the forest to just kind of figure out what to do with the band, and they start hearing her voice singing out in the trees. So there's a couple of instances where music kind of overlaps with this sense of being between places in the book. On the one hand, the band is known for having this cursed song called Midnight Ritual, where they played it one time, at a little venue, and midway through the song, the room plunged into darkness and silence, and everybody felt like they had just been sort of snatched out of reality for a moment. And when everything came back, there was like a stampede for the doors and somebody died, getting trampled. But so there's this idea that the song is what kind of pulled them out of reality. And that comes into play later when we get into what it is that's actually like haunting the forest and kind of mimicking her voice and using music as a way of getting into our world from these other spaces. So I don't know that I have anything profound to say about the connection between music and liminality, just that it's
there, that it's a thing, that it's not just like, literally 10 minutes ago I posed it to you back in our warm-up room as a question, but obviously it's great that you're like, of course I have something to say about that, and it was something that inspired you to write your novel, which it sounds like it has both parts of that liminal space going on. You've got this forest going on in Oregon, which is like definitionally, I think, what we'd say that face value liminal space, where I think maybe the horror people who are like, ooh, liminal space, give me the creepy forest. But then it also sounds like you've moved it to places of your own inspiration where, okay, there's something supernatural going on as well, and possibly even more supernatural. Or how does it, if you could, I know the book's not out yet, but I just have a feeling that maybe, how does the liminality relate to that character, that missing character? And is she a viewpoint character in the book, or is she just sort of the inciting incident? Or you can't say yet.
I can't really say too much, but I will say, just showing again the cover.
Yeah, hold it straight up. Move it a little bit more. I want to take a better look at it and hold it. Okay. Oh, I love it. So cool. Who did the cover?
Matthew Revert. So this is put out by Clash. So
Same as Matthew Revert did mine too.
Oh, really? No way.
Hold up this cover. You have a Matthew Revert cover.
He's amazing. He's amazing.
Yeah. So there's fungus involved, and that's the connection, I guess, between the character and it all ties together. I don't want to say.
I don't know if cryptobotany is a word, or if it's a word yet, but
oh wow.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. That sounds really cool. Luisa, we talk about music quite a bit. Does liminality in music, is that something that you've thought about, or if not, am I putting you on the spot to say, is there any connections or non-connections you might see between liminality and music.
Oh, absolutely. I can't say that I thought of it before you asked me. I actually had to ask my teenage son to define the word for me, which he did readily without hesitation.
Let's hear it. Can you recreate your son's
Sure.
oh, cool question, Mom? Or what was that? Recreate. Give us a scene there.
He didn't actually. He wasn't really surprised by the question. He said that it's considered a temporary space in between spaces. I think he put it a lot better.
What a bright kid. I mean, he looked. I saw a picture of him the other day, and I looked at him. I'm like, he looks like a mad professor. You know,
he's smart as a whip. And I go to him with a lot of questions. So
wow.
Yeah, he put it better than I did, but it was kind of like a space that's between spaces and it's transitional. So for me, that description was perfect, and it was sort of like neutral enough that I could apply a lot of different mediums to the concept or vice versa. For me, I have to say it's a lot about anticipation and choices in a book or a movie or music, because I'm not necessarily like musically intelligent or inclined. I love music, but I don't know it the way I know film. But for me, when I start to listen to music, I'm anticipating, what is going to be the core of this piece or this song, the same way in a horror movie or any movie in general or book. What is the core of this piece? So there's anticipation in like walking down that hallway. And then there's also that idea of like choices, because the character or creator or composer is going to make choices in their narrative. So what are those choices going to be? And then something that's always really intrigued me since I was a kid is like the backwardsness of that transitional space, like looking backwards and what would happen if you went back. So you have a hallway with choices and you're walking towards it in whatever medium we're talking about. But then to me, there's also like what's being left behind. So those are all sort of the aspects of my thought process now that I understand what the word means.
I love both your answers. Both are things I have not thought of before, but I'm absolutely intrigued by both answers. I'll have to just unpack them one at a time. But with choices, that's so great, because I feel like choices for me is what makes good fiction or great dynamic structure. You can have a great idea, but if there's something without choices, something's a little bit flat about it. And then just looking, I never thought to look backwards on it. That is so. I'm obsessed with like the forwardness, almost like the dualities or doppelgangers or alternate spaces. I feel like I have to like resist writing about it that way, but looking backwards is just another great way of looking at it.
I have to say, like, where that sparked with me was when I was really little watching The Wizard of Oz. I've seen it, when I was a kid, I watched it over and over and over dozens of times. And I had a fascination. It was almost like a little fetishistic with her going forward on the yellow brick road, but my desire to see what would happen if she went back. Because I didn't realize watching it as a kid that those were sets. I thought there was really a very long winding road behind her going down hills. And I was really fascinated about what would happen if she went back, and, what Munchkinland would be like. Would everyone be sleeping? Would they be like, why are you here? All the lights out. So that's like my earliest memory of being fascinated with like what's behind you or the character or the creator.
I would pay good money to see that film or that story in both implications of that, either in literally like the world of the Wizard of Oz, of just like, hey, I dropped my phone, let's go back a mile and we're on there. Right. But also like even on a total meta level, like I would just love to see them break the fourth wall and be like, you can't go back, turn that camera off, and like just kind of walk into like a set. So I don't know. I think that might be in the public domain. If who knows, maybe there's a short story or a comic in there. Joe, liminality in film. Any liminal spaces in film or in fiction that come to your mind?
That is a good question. I feel like, first of all, I feel like there must be some really good film examples that I'm not thinking of.
Obviously, other than the Wizard of Oz that Luisa just
Yeah,
and I asked you first because I'm going to throw it
I
back to Luisa with her knowledge of horror films for sure. Oh, we
in
froze up.
some ways, liminality is hard to capture in something like film, or I think anything narrative, which is interesting that we're talking about the elements of narrative that are liminal. But I guess the more like literal idea of the between space, I think is really hard to capture what makes it so unsettling in the form of a narrative where we're structuring reality, right? That's what narrative does. It structures into a pattern with some kind of payoff. And I feel like a lot of times when there's like an attempt to explore liminal spaces in a story, sometimes it falls flat because it loses what makes it.
It's too on the nose, just sort of
Yeah,
like
yeah.
those liminal spaces that sort of like just sort of are, organically kind of come into narrative.
It's it's funny because I wish that my brain automatically was thinking of like the best examples, but all I can think of is like the worst example,
Like
which
what?
is
Yeah, give us the worst example.
maybe
Let's-
not the worst, not the worst,
give
just
us
the
the-
one that is at the forefront of my mind, and it's not very good.
Okay.
It was one of the, and I haven't watched like any of the others, but the American Horror Stories, where it's like the individual episodes.
Okay,
And I
okay.
watched this one because I'm interested in liminal spaces, and it was a take on the backrooms, basically. And I wanted to see how they did it. And some of the visuals were effective, but as far as like an interesting story, I don't think it really worked. It's like it wanted to take the aesthetic of the liminal space and try to shove it into a story where it wasn't like narratively satisfying.
I have to admit that's the least not to disparage it at all, but upon learning about backrooms, and I'm a real newcomer to that term and phenomenon and the internet sensation of liminal space, I was like, oh, but also that's sort of the least it's the least interesting part for me because it seems like it's the most on the nose, or also just the most it's the most surface level. Maybe it's just the aesthetic, and it fits into almost like that I think it was either mentioned anticipation. It feels like it's almost like a long wind up to a jump scare.
Yeah.
And that's like the least interesting part for me. Not that.
I do think that the most interesting, if we're just like talking backrooms and for that exact aesthetic, the best examples of that I've seen are the super like underground videos that creators have like put on YouTube, where it feels like it's this crackly old like VHS tape, and it's just leaning into the unsettling nature of the location, rather than trying to make a story out of it, I guess, because it's just like pure aesthetic. But in terms of fiction, I think there's maybe more opportunity, because I think the visual medium just gets stuck in the aesthetic of it. But there's books like, there's House of Leaves, which is, quintessential. The entire house becomes this liminal space. Love it or hate it. Or there's like the short novel, A Short Stay in Hell, I think by Stephen Peck, which is,
What's that one about?
It's like an example of the Library of Babel, basically, Borges' idea. So it's this, hell is this infinite library. And the concept of the book is that once you find, I think it's like the book of your life story, then you get to like leave or whatever. But the problem is that the library is basically infinite, and every single book that could ever possibly be conceived is in it, including books of complete nonsense, just gibberish letters. And I think that's the element that makes it feel liminal, right? Because the library doesn't necessarily seem liminal to me, but a library filled with mostly nonsense gibberish books which and once you read the book and you see like they start to try to figure out the size of the library, and it's like this inconceivably massive space. Something about that becomes liminal because there's just no escape from it.
I love the notion of a supernatural or supernatural related library, but I feel like even of the vanilla library, the ones that we have, I feel like those are liminal spaces in terms of even definitionally. Like, if you're doing a library right, you're going to come in one way and come out the other, or at least, or with the potential of it. Like, I feel like a library is such a liminal space because it's the gateway to so. Maybe it's just so nerdy or hallmarky, but it's such a gateway to so much greatness.
That is a good point. Yeah.
I wanted to talk about liminality in music, but you talked about aesthetic without story, and it at least in the film. And I think for me that popped into my mind is liminal spaces in films, or at least horror or sci-fi films, of aesthetic with story. For me, I feel like it's the first, and maybe even all, of the Alien series, especially the first Alien, just starting with the first scene of the space jockey. Now that's kind of the mystery's out of the bag, for better or for worse, but what a liminal space. And so high on liminality, so high on aesthetic, but it also just so high on story. And that story, even though the story wasn't given to us, that was almost like the ultimate mystery for me until it was not a mystery anymore. And I'm like, wow, what a great liminal space there. So yeah, that was an example that came to my mind. And there's an author, a friend and a colleague of mine. His name is John Foster, and while he does write horror, he also writes crime. And there's something I love about John's work. I hope he's listening, so I get credit for shouting it out. But if not, hi, John. But he has these very fast-paced, sometimes violent, these crime scenes or chase scenes. But in between those scenes, there are scenes when the character there's the quiet scenes, or not so much the transitional scenes where that would be too on the nose, but there are sometimes these quiet scenes in between there, and I feel like he does them really organically. I call them that's the John Foster scene. No one else does it like that. But they're the characters where they're often they're just breaking for food, or they're breaking to get refuel or at a gas station, and they operate as these liminal spaces structurally from the fast pace of the story. But John's special spin on it is there always seems to be an emotional resonance for me. And even if they're just there was one, I think they were just hiding out in New England and just getting lobster rolls or a clam sandwich in between this violent stuff that's going to happen. And it just, there's something about that space that is noticeable. For lack of any other intellectual understanding on it, is something about it. It's noticeable. I'm going to come to Luisa about horror movies and liminality in just a second, but I was thinking about another thought just left my mind. I'll come back to it about liminality in music. So let's go over to Luisa with horror, about liminality in horror movies.
Yeah, to me, again, there's just so much about anticipation. What you were just talking about, that's sort of revelatory for me. I think we talked about in 2006, I was in a movie called Day Night, which was, the writer was inspired by a story she read about a suicide bomber who stopped off on her way to her mission to buy and eat some bananas. And she said for her, the most interesting thing was the bananas, which is sort of reflected in what you were just talking about that I hadn't thought of. For me, it was all when you were talking about Alien, I thought of all the eggs and how, that pre-birth time is that the ultimate liminal space, because it's the ultimate transition, right? Birth and death. So yeah, I guess you gave me something extra to think about there in terms of those moments. But what I was thinking of before that was kind of okay, this is one of my favorites. I think yours too, Daniel. I don't know about you, Joe, but The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing. We love that. And
It's setting itself just on the face value is like the
yeah,
liminal space
exactly.
in their lives. Like, is Antarctica that station a liminal space, or is it the fact that, hey, 3 months until, or however many months till the next plane, is that a liminal space?
Right. The whole movie, in a way, is a liminal space made
Yeah,
up of like liminal moments. When I think
yeah,
about sort of like the moments before the thing reveals itself, there's literal hallways with shadows and like movement that you're not sure what's going
yeah.
on. It's like very literal transitional space as a hallway between two spaces. Like for them, it's the before and the after. But you're right. The whole movie is a liminal space made up of maybe like increasingly liminal moments, like up until the end. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it, but like that's the moment that leaves everyone hanging and is still like a topic of discussion of what exactly is going on there, right? Like that's like an encapsulated little moment. But when I think about the topic with horror, I think that's where I go, is like that anticipation, the moment that you go over the edge into what the horror is. Because I guess the movies I'm thinking of don't open with someone in like the midst of whatever the main element of horror is. It's like getting there,
Mm.
the choices they make or don't make to get there. So yeah, I'm thinking of horror movies that have that element. And I guess like in my book, well, both my books, there's like lead up to a moment and then it takes it from there. So like if that moment didn't happen or that event, then it wouldn't go there. So yeah, I feel like that's in music, in movies, in books. That transitional moment before whatever the work is goes there.
That brings me to my next question, so I'll throw it right back at you. I want to ask you both about how liminality, either intentionally or just how it manifests itself in your work. So, can you tell us a little bit more about maybe one or two of those moments in your work and how it fits into the story, the liminality of it?
Oh,
Back to you. Yeah, back to you.
okay, cool.
You answered my question, or you jumped into my question before I got there.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, so in Bad Moon Rising, my first book, it's a pretty distinct moment, but I think what makes it maybe a little unique is that one of the characters brings it about on purpose because she needs that moment in order to make things different and make things more the way she wants them to be. So it's like forced liminality, like making something happen to get to traverse that hallway into something different, to choose another door. In the Burning class, I think it's definitely more nuanced and a series of events that are transitional. So like the way I picture it, Bad Moon Rising is like a hallway where somebody like runs towards one door, whereas the Burning class is like a very winding hallway with doors on the sides that people might choose to go to but ultimately don't, and that's what kind of spirals into the horror aspects of the book.
Wow, it seems like the way you described it right there, it feels like it's almost like a written illustration of how earlier in the program you laid out the definition of liminality. That all those things, choices, backwards, what could be left behind. Joe, any examples of how liminality? I could think of a couple just from some of the works that I've read, but what pops into your mind in liminality in your own work, and how that manifests, and how maybe it came about in the creative process?
I'm really interested in settings. Like I always think about setting a lot because I think that it's such a key. I mean, especially with horror because it's atmosphere. The location is really important. So I feel like my settings often have some element of the liminal to them because I just find that interesting and unsettling. It Will Just Be Us, my haunted house book. The book is sort of kind of modeled on the Winchester Mansion, and it's this big rambling. It was built kind of chaotically. So it's, not like an intuitive layout. There's strange corners and things. And the house itself is on the edge of a swamp, which is itself this kind of weird space between
Land
civilization and nature. And
land and sea, or
yeah.
right?
And then, so yeah, I guess that's kind of the sort of liminal element of the setting of that book. And then my book, When the Night Bells Ring, takes place in a mining town in the 1800s in Nevada.
Mm.
And the main space that I think of as liminal there is the mine itself. The characters go in it, and it's all these dark, winding tunnels that don't seem to go anywhere. I'm just very interested in dark, winding tunnels in horror. I find it creepy. But
As we horror readers do,
Yeah.
and share with you.
even the town itself, though, it's kind of a liminal space, because it's this little town sort of in the middle of nowhere, in an era where it wasn't easy to, like, obviously travel or communicate beyond the boundaries of the town. It's just surrounded by, wilderness, basically. So going there feels very isolating for the people. And yeah, so I think those are the kind of the two like liminal settings that come to mind. But I'm curious, Daniel, what other ideas you have?
Both of your answers are just sparking all sorts of ideas that I haven't thought of before. I'm going to say this one, but the other, I was just also thinking, like, I was thinking a self-doubt thought while I was thinking that some of the people who have been on the program who are professors, they've mentioned, won't name names, they've mentioned to me behind the scenes, like, when I'm like, hey, like, liminality, have you thought about it? And apparently, even in academia, this is not a new concept at all. In fact, it's quite a tired, or maybe even like a boring concept. Like, yeah, I have to admit, when you mentioned liminality, I was kind of like, oh, I'm like, wow, to me it's so new and fresh. I'm not in the academic world, so I haven't really studied fiction in any formal sense. So at least for me, I'm like, wow, this is so exciting and new. But some people are like, ugh. But I don't know. But I'll go back to the exciting part. Joe, when you mentioned the mining town, it made me, and of course setting, like, yeah, I'm definitely a setting forward person in my creative process too. When you mentioned the mining town, it made me think of liminality and time, even liminality and time as it goes to place. Because when I thought of that mining town, I'm like, oh, what is limit? I'm like, oh wow, a mining town often seems like before the boom and the after, which just leads itself to so much conflict, so much choices, not even putting the supernatural spin on it as we like to do. And then it just was like, it's such an exciting thing to think about. The thought that left and now has gone back to my mind is way back to the liminality in music. And I thought of, like, that music and liminality going, even the play and the places we take in our music. Like, if we're talking about concerts, almost like the concert halls are these liminal spaces, even going right back to Phantom of the Opera. Like, there are places where music is so important to me. Like, it is where it's almost like the before, the during, and after of the concert. It's definitely a threshold. If it's a good concert, I'm always changed. And even just like, what are we doing when we're standing there together listening to this music? And like, what is the act of music? Is it someone once said music was the act of decorating time or painting time? And I'm like, wow. What's that? Yeah, it was such a profound. I don't want to take credit for that, because someone profoundly said it, but it's also so much more. Like, going to a concert, sometimes you're connecting. Music has a way of connecting to, going back to Luisa's looking backwards, past parts of yourself. That music meant something to you. Maybe it does again. Maybe we're seeking it again. Maybe we didn't mean to. And then even looking forward, where you're like, wow, I'm seeing something new in this music, or new in what I thought this music meant to me. And in the best of ways, I think that's how music and liminality can be. And then even just like the personal spaces of, like, I could think back of places of, like, wow, where I was even as just like a kid with a tape, or a kid stealing, my dad's headphones, of like where I first received the music. Like, wow, that was the first time I heard that. And then even not even talking about what I think the two of you were saying in the beginning of the program, the music itself, like the liminality in the music between passages, between structures, or actually that's so exciting when you can hear a song and be like, oh, I didn't think it went there, or not even saying it in a conscious way of just like, oh, that song is stale. Like, yeah, I've heard that song 100 times before. About, I once knew a musician. He was just such a prodigy, and he one time I took him to a concert. Actually, it was a band called the Necks, like our neck, an Australian sort of psychedelic jazz trio, and he actually thanked me. He was like, Dan, I didn't think. He was like, I'm so jaded with music as I study it, I live it so much, because I didn't think I could find a band where I couldn't consciously understand what they're doing, and that was such. To him, that was such a refreshing thing, or was a joyful thing for him to like, wow, I actually found something new in music before. Before we turn it over to your readings, the other of that in between space, a musician, Regina Spektor. Not someone I think of when thinking of Liminal Space, but I heard her. I think it was during the pandemic. I feel like I talked about this on the show, so forgive me if I'm repeating. But someone was really pressing her with questions about her inspiration about music, and she didn't duck the question, but she gave these very ambiguous answers to it, and the interviewer was pushing her, and she's like, hey, I don't feel any pressure to have to explain my inspiration. It wasn't defensive to the interview. She's like, the inspiration, I'm fine just knowing that it is that magical thing, or just it is that thing that I don't understand, and I'm just going to be open to it, and I'm just going to take it and be in that space, and that's where the stuff comes from, or that sometimes you can be like, yeah, this is a song about loss or a song about love, and sometimes, or it's something else, like Luisa, you said, yeah, it's the bananas that's sparking that interstitial magic in there. Enough of our talking. I'd love to hear from both of your work. Joe, would you introduce what you're going to read, or you'd like to read for us?
Sure.
So
it was interesting having these conversations because, Luisa, something that you said early on about choices and looking backwards appeared directly in the story that I'm going to read.
Oh, that's great. All the
Cool.
liminality and synchronicities in our conversation.
I specifically picked a liminal. Actually, I picked my story where I am trying to grapple with taking the liminal space aesthetic and putting it into a story. So I figured that would work well. It was published in Nightmare Abbey, issue 7.
Which issue?
And it's called The Third Floor. I'm going to read the second half of the story because I think that is the more satisfying part. But to kind of preface and get into it, I'm going to start with the first paragraph, which just kind of sets it up. Most of the time, the house where Kyla lived had 2 floors, but on rare occasions there appeared a third. She could never anticipate when it would be there. The entrance, too, was never in the same place. Sometimes she would be bounding up the stairs to her bedroom after school, leaping over the 5th from the top, which bellowed with every touch, and find that though the stairs turned out onto the hallway of the 2nd floor in the usual place, they also continued upward to a door that sat at the end of a dark alcove. The door was always closed. Other times, it appeared in peculiar places, like the time she opened the door to the bathroom and discovered, to her astonishment, a set of stairs on the other side of the bathtub, where no sane architect would place them. So the first half of the story follows Kyla as a child, and she keeps encountering this, mysterious staircase up to the non-existent 3rd floor, but it disappears when she tries to bring her parents to show them, so, they don't really believe her. And she goes up and tries to open the door, but it's locked. But she senses a presence on the other side, but she never manages to go through. So I'm going to pick it up now in the second half of the story. For years, Kyla forgot about the 3rd floor. She might even have come to believe that what she thought she'd experienced had been no more than a vivid dream, one which pursued her for a time and then sank into the froth of the unconscious. Other things occupied her mind. The growing rift between her parents that she was sure would have ended in divorce had her mother not died suddenly of a pulmonary embolism, The tedious jobs she worked to put herself through college, her marriage, and subsequent purchase of a quaint two-story townhome. It wasn't, indeed, until she began to think about growing her own family that she even remembered finding a staircase in her bedroom closet as a child. Her husband was waiting for her in bed, preparing to commence their first purposeful attempt at pregnancy. Kyla flipped off the bathroom light and swung open the door, expecting to see him with one knee cocked playfully up where he lay. Instead, she was confronted by darkness so absolute she palmed the switch again. It was not the master bedroom through the doorway, but a staircase, lined by the very same wallpaper she'd glimpsed in her youth. If pressed, she would not have been able to recall the pattern well enough to draw it, but seeing it again, there was no mistake. The bathroom's overhead lights glared on white tile. There were no windows. This had not bothered her upon purchasing the house, but now, with no egress from the tiny room except the stairway leading up, she felt the first prickling of claustrophobia. She went up. She expected the door to be locked when she reached for the handle, but it turned. Surprise carried her through the open doorway, and then she was on the third floor. Rather, she was in the hallway of the third floor. It extended left and right as far as she could see, lined with doors set at even increments. Between each door hung a sconce emitting a patient glow. The walls were papered with that same pattern that encased the stairs. A door across the hall revealed a staircase going up. She closed the door and moved on to the next, only to find yet another staircase. On and on she went down the hall. Behind every door was another staircase, each identical to the last. It made her dizzy to think about where she was right now. Nothing of this size could possibly exist in her house. She decided to go up to the fourth floor, where she found more of the same. Another door-lined hallway. The only difference was that several of the sconces had burnt out, leaving periodic pockets of shadow. Surely, she thought, there had to be something other than halls and stairs. Surely they had to lead somewhere. But each time she opened a door, she found no rooms, no closets, no exits, only staircases. Foregoing the doors, she peered down the length of the hall, wondering how far it went. Each way tapered into muddy shadow after some indescribable distance. The soles of her bare feet scraped against rough carpet, which bore a different pattern from the walls, one which seemed an endless series of unfinished squares. The more she looked, the more she sensed someone moving far down the hall. Far enough she could make out the shape of it only barely. But she became increasingly convinced there was someone there, very far down the hall, perhaps staring back at her and wondering about her. She raised an arm to wave, feeling foolish, not sure if what she saw in the distance was a person at all, but it seemed to lift something of itself at the same time. Thinking the person had waved back, she hurried forward, passing several dozen doors on the way, her speed walk turning to a jog, turning to a run. Yet the person remained, it seemed, the same distance away as before. Indeed, it seemed the person was running away from her as she ran toward them. When Kyla looked in the other direction, she thought she saw another figure at that end of the hall. At least, she imagined the person stood at the end of the hall, but neither did the hall seem to have an end either way. She decided to go up to the fifth floor. It was identical to the others, save where the wallpaper had begun to peel away from the wall behind it, bubbling up in loose spots. She wanted to press it back, but she stopped herself from touching it. The paper seemed too soft and spongy, as if there were something more behind it than an air pocket. She went up again. After some time, she lost track of what floor she was on. She worried the only direction she could go was up. Even when she turned around and tried to go back down the way she'd come, she found the stairs had changed directions. It was with great relief that she finally opened a door to discover a staircase that went down. She hesitated before it, still curious about the others, wondering where they went. if they would eventually reach some mysterious top floor, some place with actual rooms. Or she wondered, did they simply continue upward, ad infinitum, the way the hallway seemed to extend infinitely to either side? She decided she would not find out. She took the stairway down. After trying several doors on the next level, she discovered some half a dozen different descending stairways. Surely they all led to the same lower level, just as all the ascending stairways did. But was she sure of that? Did it matter which one she took? No, she was sure they would all lead back to the same level. She took one at random and went down, losing track again of how many flights she had ascended and now descended, losing all track of where she could possibly be in relation to her bedroom, to her house, if she was anywhere at all in relation to her house anymore. Her gut did not begin to twist sickly until she was quite sure she had descended more levels than she had ascended. It didn't seem possible, but she kept finding more and more and more staircases that led downward, each seemingly identical to the last. And so she went, her ears pulsing with heavy, stagnant air, wishing she had never gone up to the third floor in the first place, wondering in the back of her mind, in a way she did not really allow herself to consciously wonder, whether she would ever leave this place. And then she found it. A door at the bottom of a staircase, which deposited her into a dark room. For a moment, she stood blinking to adjust her eyes. By degrees, dim shapes made themselves known, and she came to recognize her bedroom. On the bed lay a shape snuggled under the covers. Her husband must have gotten tired waiting for her to come out of the bathroom and gone to sleep. Why hadn't he come to check on her, though? It wasn't like him to fall asleep when he anticipated sex. She did not close the door behind her when she stepped into the room, for she was sure when she did, reopening it would lead her back into the bathroom. Instead, she crept to the bed and crawled beneath the covers. Some hours later, the morning light would gradually reveal her husband's sleeping face, and she would lie beside him, wondering if it was her husband. She would notice how the house was both familiar and strange, which she told herself was because they'd moved in only a few weeks before. Yet she could not convince herself nothing was wrong, that it did not smell wrong, that it was truly the house she had purchased. And she could never really be sure that she had come out where she'd meant to, that she hadn't picked the wrong door.
Great reading. Thank you so much for
That was so beautiful.
for the reading. And
I didn't want you to stop reading.
Could you hold that up one more time? The Nightmare Abbey.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, great. Thanks for picking such an on-topic
Oh my gosh.
reading. And
Amazing.
I definitely want to give a shout out, an extra shout out to Nightmare Abbey. I believe it's edited by Tom English. That's definitely a publication that I right after I log off, I'm going to have to go get a copy of that. And they could use. Tom's doing some great work, some great choices, and I think that they could use a little love. So check out Nightmare Abbey, number 7. What's the name of the story again, Joe?
The story is called The Third Floor.
Third Floor. Thank you so much for that. Let's turn it over to Luisa, if you'll introduce what you're going to read for
I have
us.
to put my glasses on.
All right.
Joe, that was amazing, and it's incredible how perfectly aligned it was with the topic of this. Really amazing. Knocked it out of the park.
Thank you.
Great job.
Okay. So again, my book is The Burning Class. It's published by Cemetery Dance Publications. Just like a very brief background, the main character, Anna Lee, spends time in her abuela's neighborhood in Gravesend, Brooklyn, and makes a friend there whose name is Tenacity, but it's Tenny for short. When I was with my friends in Windsor Terrace, we did regular kind of girl stuff, but being with Tenny was different. We both loved the idea of fairies so much that we pretended we believed in them. We found a huge gnarled old tree a few blocks from Abuela's apartment and decided it was a fairy kingdom. The tree sat right by the street, and the sidewalk had buckled around it, exposing some of the roots. When we sat at its base, we didn't see the cars passing by or hear the elevated train on McDonald Avenue. We just saw an ancient kingdom where fairies would want to live. The tree trunk was enormous, the bark thick and dense. We didn't try to peel off chunks of it. We perched on the slabs of defeated concrete and pointed to parts of the roots. Here is a bridge for the fairies to cross. I can still hear Tenny saying in her strange, scratchy voice. It's the entrance to the kingdom. Once they cross the bridge, everything belongs to them. See how the roots go up and down? The fairies slumber in these dips and slopes. They sit with their wings aflutter on these knots, these rough gnarls. We bought a sketch pad and drew a map of the kingdom. We labeled the bridges and the shelters and the lakes. Tenny was very good at drawing, and she somehow managed to both represent the way things really looked and make them magical too. She had a bin from her old house in Park Slope that was filled with art supplies. Simple things like pipe cleaners and glue, but also a wondrous assortment of odds and ends. Tiny fabric flowers, bits of gossamer, and cloth remnants that looked like faded wallpaper you might find in an old vacant house. Once vivid and bright, now long forgotten, the patterns of tiny leaves and buds nearly invisible. We made our own fairies, twisting the pipe cleaner into bodies, cutting dresses from the faded fabric, adding wings and crowns of roses. We made tiny books for the fairies to read, and the fairies had conflicts, drama. Bow your head, relinquish your crown, Tenny commanded, and then later, I forgive you, all is forgiven. Sometimes we took Candy down into the basement of Abuela's apartment building. There was a garage, a laundry room, and a door at the very end of a corridor that had a small sign, Fallout Shelter. The door was never locked, and it opened into a tiny room. Tenny and I liked to think we were the only ones who knew about it. It was our secret room. We brought down a blanket and sat on it and ate jelly beans and pretended we were survivors of a nuclear fallout. Tenny described what it would be like, and it scared me a little. Even just pretending we were the last people on Earth made me uneasy. Tenny seemed to like the idea. And it did seem safe in a strange way, but I didn't want to be stuck with her forever with no one else to talk to or play with. Tenny loved making prank phone calls. We huddled around the phone together at her apartment if Iris was sleeping, or at mine if my parents were out, hearts pounding. Hello, I'm calling from the refrigerator repair company, Tenny would say in her distinctive scratchy voice after dialing some random number. Is your refrigerator running? And if the stranger on the other line said yes, Tenny would shriek out, then you'd better go catch it. Not everyone took the bait. Some people just hung up or were confused or yelled at us to stop wasting their time. We called Corvey Welliver. Tenny had looked up the Welliver's number in the phone book, and she brought it over to Windsor Terrace on a piece of her father's old stationery. We both pressed our ears to the receiver as we listened to the phone ring. My heart beat very quickly. And then a young male voice. Corvey. Hello? Hi, whispered Tenny, trying to disguise her voice. This is the refrigerator repair company, and we called to ask if your refrigerator is running. Let me just take a look, said Corvey, and Tenny and I looked at each other, wide-eyed. Oh my God, he went on. Holy shit, it's running away. It's trying to escape. Come back, refrigerator. He dropped the phone and we heard his footsteps pounding as he pretended to give chase. Come back here, you fucking bitch. There was a tussle as if he was wrestling with something. You piece of shit fridge, he hissed, suddenly back on the phone. You think you can get away from me? You'll never, ever get away from me. I'm going to make you wish you were never manufactured. He laughed, his voice low and drawling. I'm gonna fuck you up. Tenny slammed down the phone and we stared at each other, breathless. We called him again after that. Sometimes we just listened for when he said hello and then hung up, flushed and giggling. But by then I had a little secret that I held close. I had a crush on Corvey too, even though I'd only ever caught the most fleeting glimpses of him. Striding by us, making spooky noises at Tenny, a Coke in one hand and a cigarette in the other, or sitting above the street on a fire escape with some of his friends, sneakered feet dangling, jeering at the people down below. He was Tenny's crush first, so I pretended to be indifferent, but even the sound of his name made me feel flushed and excited. Abuela knew who he was. She called him Rubio because of his unusual hair. He became one of the neighborhood characters to speak of or gossip about whenever something bad happened, as if he were solely responsible for every instance of robbery, vandalism, or fire, especially fire. For Corvey was known as a kid who liked to watch things burn. Anything that had been set ablaze, a charred, smoldering shopping cart by the train station, or the oozy, blackened remnants of a soda bottle that had been filled with newspaper and then lit on fire, was all assumed to be Corvey's handiwork. "Where are the parents?" my mother would murmur when Rubio came up in conversations. My dad would call him a bad seed, and if I were in earshot, I'd find myself smiling. Tenny started smoking. If I smelled smoke in the lobby of Abuela's apartment building, I'd know she was waiting for me in the fallout shelter. There were even echoes of cigarette smoke in the house on Windsor Terrace when Tenny was there. Mama was not happy. "Your friend's been smoking in our house, Annalise," she screamed, waving her hands theatrically in front of her face. "Yell at her, don't yell at me," I screamed back. "I will when I see her. She sneaks around," snapped Mama, who was no longer as sympathetic towards Tenny as she'd once been. She felt that the older, teenage Tenny was trouble. "How do you even get in here?" I would mutter irritably at Tenny when I found her smoking in Abuela's fallout shelter, but I already knew. Tenny liked going into the buildings and ringing every buzzer to see if someone would let her in, and then roaming around or going up onto the roof. I did it with her sometimes, but I didn't like the feeling of being so high up, or the way Tenny stared down at the streets below intently, like she might jump at any moment. Sometimes she brought food like fruit or sandwiches and threw the remnants over the low wall so she could watch them go splat. We went to Park Slope and Tenny showed me the house she'd grown up in. "That was my window," she said wistfully, pointing to the second floor of the looming stately brownstone. Then she tugged on my arm. "Look, see those paper clips?" I wasn't sure what she meant at first, but then I saw a little chain of metal paper clips dangling from one of the window bars. "I made that," she said. "I put the clips together and hung them from the window before we moved, so that I could pass by and always see them." "Why?" I asked, even though I thought I understood. It's like my past life waving at me," she said, and waved back.
Thank you so much. And yet another fantastic and totally different manifestation of liminality. And it's the place where you just ended it. I was like making a note. I'm like, oh, this is such a liminal
Past waving
time of
back. Oh
life
my
of
gosh.
just like, yeah. Even before that, I was like, oh, teenage years is such a liminal space of like, you're not a child, you're not an adult. But then she quite literally manifested it looking at that window, and then even like a thing there, and then what a great selection. Thank you so much. Thank you both for such great readings and for entertaining me my off the cuff questions off the script. I really appreciate it. We mentioned Nightmare Abbey #7. Joe, where else? Is Midnight Muse open for pre-order now?
Yes.
Oh, where can that be pre-ordered?
I mean, the usual places, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, but also Bookshop. I've been sharing the Bookshop link because it's, a way of supporting independent bookstores.
Okay, great. Is that bookshop.com? Bookshop.com?
I think it's bookshop.org.
Bookshop.org. Okay,
But
great.
yeah, if you search the Midnight Muse, it's on there.
And when's that hitting? When's that released? That's not till next year?
March 10th.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
But
I have a ways to wait.
Clash has a bunch of, early copies, and if you catch them at some event where they're selling books, they have them. So.
This is a real motivation there. Where can people connect with you, Joe, and the rest of your work?
You can find all my stuff. I keep a running list of the things that I've published or I will forget on my website, which is joe-kaplan.com.
Thank you so much. Luisa, is it the Burning Class and Bad Moon Rising, those can both be ordered now? Is that over at cemeterydance.com?
Yep, they're both at Cemetery Dance and Amazon and Barnes & Noble, I guess, wherever books can be found in the mainstream.
Fantastic. And where can people connect with you and your writing and all your other creations?
Right now, the best place is probably my website, which is luisacologne.com. I'm currently taking a little break from social media. So, yeah, that's the best place to find me, luisacologne.com.
All right, fantastic. I want to thank the two of you for being here to wrap up the last installment of the Summer of Liminal Space, and also want to thank the other writers who were exploring and reading with me this summer. Before we go, I'll just hold up the book Creatures of Liminal Space one last time, and I realized that I never, at least not in this series, I don't think I spent as much time talking about liminality in art. I feel like that could be its own series in as well. The book is put out by Jackanapes Press, which is owned and operated by Dan Sauer, who's also the illustrator of it. Here's just one liminal space from a story called Houdini's Grave that he did there. Houdini's Grave. He's just fantastic.
Did he do the cover as well?
He did the cover, and he did the cover to Phantom Constellations. I'll give a plug for Phantom Constellations before we log out here. Are you seeing, I guess I'll hold it up there so I can read. Are you seeing what you think you are seeing? Are the connections that we make objectively true? Or are they products of our minds, assigning meaning and sense when there is none? The stars in the sky exist unaffected by how we choose to categorize them. Constellations are phantoms, the shapes we give them only as real as we make them. I guess I'm referring to myself in third person here. In Daniel Braum's fifth book of stories, you will find haunted people, ghosts, and the phantom constellations all around them, bravely traversing phantasmagoric and psychological challenges in situations full of danger, uncertainty, grief, and tragedy. And that can be pre-ordered now at cemeterydance.com. So thank you to my guests today. Thank you for everyone this summer. And enjoy the liminality of the season. Take care, everyone. Be well.
Thank you so much.
Man.
Stay connected, you two. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.